The scent of freshly ground coffee beans was my only comfort that morning. I inhaled deeply as I prepared the intricate espresso machine at Bella Rosa, the upscale Italian cafe where I'd been working for the past 8 months. My fingers trembled slightly as I tamped down the grounds, a result of another sleepless night spent worrying about rent, about Dad's medical bills, about everything that seemed to be crumbling around me. "Emma, table 7 needs their breakfast order," Sophia called out, her voice betraying the stress of the morning rush. "I'll be right there," I replied, glancing at my watch, 6 hours into my double shift, and my feet already ached in protest. But I couldn't complain. This job and the tips it provided were all that stood between me and eviction. The cafe was unusually busy for a Wednesday. Men in expensive suits occupied most tables, their voices creating a constant murmur beneath the soft classical music playing overhead. I'd learned to move invisibly between them, a ghost delivering their sustenance before disappearing again. That's what they preferred, service without having to acknowledge the server. I was arranging a tray with our signature espresso when the atmosphere in the room shifted. The constant chatter fell to a whisper, then to nothing at all. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, a primitive warning system alerting me to a predator's presence. When I turned, I saw them enter. 3 men, impeccably dressed, moved with purposeful strides through the cafe. 2 flanked the third, their eyes constantly scanning the room, hands positioned for easy access to whatever weapons they undoubtedly carried beneath their tailored jackets. But it was the man in the center who commanded the space, who seemed to pull all the oxygen from the room with each measured breath. He couldn't have been older than 35, with sharp features that seemed carved from marble. Dark hair, perfectly styled, framed a face that belonged in a Renaissance painting. Beautiful, but in the way that inspires fear rather than comfort. His suit, charcoal gray, and obviously custom-made, draped over his broad shoulders like armor. But it was his eyes that froze my blood, deep amber, almost golden in the morning light, and utterly devoid of warmth. They moved deliberately across the cafe, assessing, claiming. When they landed on me, I felt exposed, as if those eyes could see every secret I'd ever kept, every fear I'd ever harbored. I dropped my gaze immediately, focusing on the coffee cups before me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I heard the distinct sound of chairs being pulled out at table 9, our best table, always reserved though rarely occupied. "Emma," Sophia hissed, appearing at my side. Her face had lost all color. "That's Alessio Moretti," the name hung in the air between us, weighted with unspoken implications. Everyone in the city knew of the Moretti family, though they were spoken of only in whispers. They controlled everything from the docks to City Hall, their influence extending like an invisible web across our lives. Alessio had taken over after his father's mysterious death 3 years ago, and rumors of his ruthlessness preceded him like a shadow. "Take this to them," Sophia instructed, placing a small tray of biscotti beside my coffee cups. "And for God's sake, don't make eye contact." My legs felt like lead as I approached their table. The 2 men, bodyguards I assumed, watched my approach with cold, calculating eyes. I set down the complimentary biscotti with trembling hands. "Good morning, gentlemen. Welcome to Bella Rosa. Can I get you anything to start?" I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded, betraying nothing of the fear coursing through my veins. "Espresso," one of the guards answered curtly. 3. I nodded and turned to leave, relief washing over me at the simplicity of the exchange. But then his voice stopped me, low, smooth, and somehow more terrifying for its softness. "Who makes the coffee here?" I turned back slowly. Alessio Moretti was looking directly at me, his amber eyes intent. Up close, I could see the faint scar that ran along his jaw, the only imperfection in his otherwise flawless face. "I do, sir," I answered, my throat suddenly dry. His eyebrow arched slightly. "You? Not the owner?" "Mr. Ricci trained me personally, sir. He says I have a gift for it." Why had I added that? I wanted to bite my tongue off. Something flickered across his face. Amusement, perhaps, or curiosity. We'll see. I retreated to my sanctuary behind the espresso machine, my hands shaking so badly now that I had to take a deep breath before attempting to prepare their order. I could feel his eyes on me as I worked, burning into my back like twin flames. The espresso needed to be perfect. Something told me Alessio Moretti was not a man who tolerated imperfection. I selected the freshest beans, ground them to precise consistency, and extracted the espresso with methodical care, producing 3 cups with perfect crema on top. When I returned to their table, I placed each cup down gently, saving his for last. Without meaning to, I glanced up and found him watching me, those amber eyes unreadable. I quickly looked away. He picked up the cup, inhaled the aroma with closed eyes, then took a sip. The moment stretched into eternity as I waited, barely breathing. "This," he finally said, setting the cup down with precision, "is exceptional." "Thank you, sir," I murmured, relief flooding through me. "Your name?" The question caught me off guard. "Emma. Emma Foster." "Emma." The way he said my name sent a shiver down my spine, like he was tasting it, claiming it somehow. "You'll bring our coffee personally from now on." It wasn't a request. I nodded and backed away, returning to the safety of the counter. Throughout the morning, I delivered 3 more rounds of espresso to their table. Each time, Alessio watched me with that same inscrutable expression, saying nothing but observing everything. They left at precisely 11:30, leaving behind a tip that equaled a week of my usual earnings. I should have been ecstatic, but something about the encounter left me deeply unsettled. "You've been marked," Sophia whispered, as we watched their sleek black car pull away from the curb, a bulky driver navigating it into the flow of traffic. "God help you, Emma." I laughed nervously. "Don't be dramatic. He just liked the coffee." But deep down, I knew she was right. Something had changed that morning. Some invisible thread had been woven between my life and Alessio Moretti's, and I had no idea what it might mean. 2 days passed, and I began to believe I'd imagined the significance of the encounter. The Moretti men didn't return to the cafe, and life resumed its exhausting routine. I worked my shifts, counted my tips, paid what bills I could, and fell into bed each night too tired to even dream, until Friday evening, when everything changed again. I was closing up alone, Mr. Ricci having left early for his grandson's birthday dinner. The last customers had gone, leaving behind empty cups and crumpled napkins for me to clear away. Outside, rain pelted against the windows, distorting the streetlights into watery halos. I hummed quietly to myself as I wiped down tables, looking forward to going home and soaking my aching feet. The soft chime of the door made me turn, ready to apologize and explain we were closed. The words died in my throat when I saw him standing there, raindrops glistening in his dark hair. Alessio Moretti had returned, this time alone. We're closed, sir," I managed to say, clutching my cleaning cloth like a shield. He stepped further into the cafe, closing the door behind him. Without his guards, he should have seemed less intimidating. He didn't. "I know," he replied simply, removing his wet coat and hanging it on the rack by the door with elegant precision. Beneath it, he wore a crisp white shirt, the top buttons undone, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin and what looked like the edge of a tattoo. "I came for the coffee." His gaze traveled around the empty cafe before settling on me, and to see if it was really you who made it so exceptional. My heart fluttered against my ribcage like a trapped bird. "Mr. Ricci is gone for the evening." I didn't ask for Mr. Ricci. The intensity of his stare rooted me to the spot. Part of me wanted to run, to put as much distance between myself and this dangerous man as possible. But another part, a part I didn't recognize or understand, wanted to stay, to discover why he'd really come back. "One espresso, then?" I heard myself ask, already moving toward the machine. He followed, his footsteps silent on the tiled floor. "Please." I felt him watching as I worked, standing closer than any customer should. The familiar routine of preparing coffee helped steady my nerves, gave my trembling hands purpose. The rich aroma filled the space between us, momentarily masking the scent of his cologne, something expensive and subtle that reminded me of cedar and spice. When I handed him the cup, our fingers brushed briefly. An electric current seemed to run up my arm from that simple contact, and I quickly pulled away. He took a sip, those amber eyes never leaving my face. "Perfect," he murmured. "Just like before. Thank you." Do you know who I am, Emma Foster? The direct question startled me. Yes. And yet you're not running. I swallowed hard. Would it make a difference if I did? A smile curved his lips, the first I'd seen, revealing perfect white teeth. The expression transformed his face, made him look younger, almost approachable, almost. Smart girl, he said softly. Tell me, why is someone like you working 2 shifts at a cafe? You're educated. I can tell by the way you speak. You're obviously intelligent. The fact that he knew I worked double shifts sent a chill through me. He'd been asking about me. Life doesn't always go as planned, I answered carefully. My father's medical bills, well, we do what we must. Something flashed in his eyes, recognition perhaps. Yes, we do. He finished his espresso and set the cup down with deliberate care. I have a proposition for you. Fear and curiosity warred within me. What kind of proposition? I'm hosting a dinner tomorrow evening. Important guests. I want you to make the coffee. To oversee all the beverages, actually. I stared at him in confusion. You want me to cater your dinner party? I'm willing to pay $5,000 for 1 evening of your time. The figure hit me like a physical blow. $5,000 would cover 3 months of Dad's treatments. It would give me breathing room, a chance to catch up on rent, maybe even sleep through the night without financial nightmares. Why me? I asked, suspicion creeping in. Men like Alessio Moretti didn't offer that kind of money without expecting something in return. He gestured to the espresso cup. Because you make exceptional coffee, and I accept nothing less than exceptional in my home. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card, placing it on the counter between us. My address. Be there at 6 tomorrow evening. I made no move to take the card. And if I say no? That smile again, sharper this time. You won't. He was right, and we both knew it. The need for that money outweighed any reservations I might have had. Still, I couldn't just acquiesce immediately. Some remaining shred of pride demanded resistance. I have conditions, I said, surprising myself with my boldness. His eyebrow arched again. Do you? I'll make coffee and oversee beverages only. Nothing else. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked almost like offense. I'm not in the habit of paying for something else, as you put it. My proposition is exactly as stated. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. I'm sorry, I just be there at 6, he interrupted, turning toward the door. Wear something appropriate for a formal dinner. As he reached for his coat, a sudden gust of wind rattled the cafe's windows. The storm outside had intensified, rain now coming down in sheets. Do you have a ride home? He asked suddenly, glancing at the deluge. I blinked at the unexpected question. I usually take the bus. He made a sound of disapproval. In this weather? At this hour? I don't have many alternatives. He pulled out his phone, typed something brief, then returned it to his pocket. My driver will take you home when you're finished here. That's not necessary. It wasn't an offer, he cut in, his tone brooking no argument. The car will be waiting. With that, he shrugged into his coat and moved toward the door. Before leaving, he paused, turning back to fix me with those unsettling amber eyes one last time. Don't disappoint me tomorrow, Emma Foster. The words hung in the air between us, both promise and warning. Then he was gone, stepping out into the storm and disappearing into the night like a phantom. Only the business card on the counter, heavy stock, embossed with his name and an address in the most exclusive part of the city, proved he had been there at all. I finished closing the cafe in a daze, my mind racing with questions and second thoughts. As promised, a sleek black car waited at the curb when I emerged, the same bulky driver from before holding an umbrella to escort me from the door. As I settled into the luxurious leather back seat, dry despite the raging storm, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. I had just agreed to enter the lion's den willingly, with nothing but a flimsy promise of payment as protection. But what choice did I really have? The money would save my father. It would save me. Where to, miss? The driver asked, his eyes meeting mine briefly in the rearview mirror. With a deep breath, I gave him my address, watching through the rain-streaked window as he pulled away from the curb, taking me home, but also driving me inexorably toward whatever fate awaited me tomorrow in Alessio Moretti's world. The next day passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. I called Mr. Ricci to request the evening off, inventing a family emergency. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but I couldn't tell him the truth. That I was about to enter the home of the most dangerous man in the city for a sum of money that equaled 2 months of my salary. By 5 o'clock, I stood before my tiny bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman reflected back at me. I'd spent the afternoon transforming myself with the only formal dress I owned. A simple black sheath I'd worn to my mother's funeral 3 years ago. The dark fabric hugged my curves modestly, falling just below my knees. Professional enough for a caterer, elegant enough for a high-end dinner party. At least I hoped so. I'd pulled my usually unruly auburn hair into a neat chignon, applied subtle makeup to enhance my green eyes, and borrowed a pair of my roommate Jess's pearl earrings. The overall effect was adequate. Nothing that would turn heads, but presentable enough not to embarrass myself. "You're just making coffee," I reminded my reflection, trying to calm the butterflies swarming in my stomach. "Just coffee? Then you take the money and leave." The buzzer rang precisely at 5:30. The same driver from the night before waited downstairs, his face impassive as he held the car door open for me. "Good evening, miss," he said with a slight nod. "Good evening," I replied, sliding into the back seat. "I'm Emma, by the way." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, surprise flickering briefly across his stoic features. "Marco," he offered after a moment's hesitation. We drove in silence through the city, moving from my modest neighborhood with its crumbling apartment buildings and corner bodegas toward the affluent hills that overlooked the bay. As we climbed higher, the houses grew larger and farther apart, hidden behind ornate gates and dense hedges. Marco finally turned onto a private road that wound through manicured grounds. At its end stood Alessio Moretti's home, though mansion would be more accurate. The Mediterranean-style villa sprawled elegantly across the hilltop, its cream-colored walls glowing warmly in the early evening light. Fountains flanked the circular driveway, their gentle splashing creating a serene welcome that belied the nature of the man who lived here. "We're here, miss," Marco announced, pulling up to the imposing front entrance. I stepped out, clutching my small handbag like a lifeline. "Thank you." Before I could approach the massive double doors, one swung open to reveal a stern-faced woman in her 50s, dressed in a simple but elegant black uniform. "Miss Foster," she greeted me, her accent thickly Italian. "I am Mrs. Russo, Mr. Moretti's housekeeper. Please, follow me." She led me through a grand foyer with soaring ceilings and marble floors into a kitchen that would have made professional chefs weep with envy. Gleaming copper pots hung above a massive center island. State-of-the-art appliances lined the walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city below, now twinkling with early evening lights. "Mr. Moretti has instructed that you are to oversee all beverages tonight," Mrs. Russo explained, gesturing to an impressive espresso machine that looked like it belonged in a high-end cafe. "Coffee service will follow dessert. Until then, you will assist with wine service and other refreshments." I nodded, taking in the machine with appreciation. "How many guests?" 12, including Mr. Moretti. "Very important people." Her expression conveyed the gravity of the situation. "Everything must be perfect. I understand." She showed me where everything was stored: the imported coffee beans, the delicate espresso cups, the crystal glassware for the various wines that would accompany dinner. As we worked, the kitchen staff moved around us in choreographed precision, putting final touches on elaborate appetizers. "When will Mr. Moretti arrive?" I asked, attempting to sound casual. Mrs. Russo gave me a curious look. "He is already here, in his study. He does not like to be disturbed before guests arrive." I exhaled slowly, relieved for the temporary reprieve from those intense amber eyes. For the next hour, I familiarized myself with the equipment and helped the staff prepare. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as 7 o'clock approached, everyone keenly aware that their employer accepted nothing short of perfection. The first guests arrived precisely at 7. From the kitchen, I could hear the murmur of voices, the clink of glasses, soft classical music wafting from hidden speakers. Mrs. Russo directed me to help serve aperitifs, expensive champagne poured into crystal flutes arranged on silver trays. I moved carefully among the guests, offering champagne and collecting empty glasses. They were exactly as I'd imagined. Men in custom suits with hard eyes and false smiles, women draped in designer dresses and glittering with diamonds. The air was thick with expensive perfume, cigar smoke, and the unmistakable scent of power. I kept my eyes downcast, playing my role as invisible server, but I could feel curious glances from some of the men. New staff were always scrutinized in this world, I imagined. One man in particular, older, with silver-streaked hair and a predatory smile, let his fingers brush against mine as he took a champagne flute. "Grazie, Bella," he murmured, his eyes lingering inappropriately on my neckline. I withdrew my hand quickly, offering a tight smile before moving on. As I turned, I felt the weight of another gaze on me. Looking up, I found Alessio Moretti watching from across the room, his expression unreadable. He looked even more impressive tonight, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that accentuated his broad shoulders and lean waist. A dark red tie provided the only splash of color, reminiscent of spilled wine or blood. He stood slightly apart from his guests, observing rather than participating, a king surveying his court. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and something electric passed between us. Then he turned away to greet a late arrival, leaving me oddly breathless. The evening progressed smoothly. I assisted with wine service during dinner, making sure each course was paired with the appropriate selection. Through it all, I maintained my professional demeanor, though I couldn't help but notice Alessio's eyes finding me periodically throughout the meal. After dessert, an elaborate tiramisu that drew appreciative murmurs from the guests, Mrs. Russo nodded to me. It was time for coffee. I retreated to the kitchen and began preparing the espresso with methodical care. The familiar routine calmed my frayed nerves, allowing me to focus completely on creating the perfect extraction. The rich aroma filled the kitchen, drawing approving nods from the other staff. As I arranged the delicate cups on a silver tray, the kitchen door swung open. Alessio Moretti stepped in, his sudden presence causing an immediate hush among the staff. He moved directly toward me, ignoring everyone else. "Mr. Moretti," Mrs. Russo greeted him, surprise evident in her voice. "Is everything satisfactory?" "Perfectly so," he replied without looking at her, his eyes fixed on me. "I came to see how our special barista is doing." The other staff exchanged curious glances, clearly wondering who I was to warrant such attention. "The coffee is ready, sir," I said, gesturing to the tray. He stepped closer, inhaling the aroma. "Excellent. Bring it out yourself. 1 cup at a time." I frowned slightly. "1 at a time?" "Yes." His tone left no room for argument. "I want each guest to experience it properly." It was an unusual request, but I nodded agreement. As he turned to leave, he added, "And Emma? Stay afterward. I'll have something for you." The promised payment, I assumed, trying to ignore the slight shiver his words sent down my spine. For the next half hour, I served espresso individually to each guest, preparing each cup fresh and delivering it with care. They received this special treatment with varying degrees of appreciation, some barely acknowledging me, others offering genuine thanks. The silver-haired man who had touched my hand earlier made another attempt at flirtation, but a sharp look from Alessio silenced him immediately. By the time the last guest had been served, my feet ached and my nerves were frayed, but I felt a sense of accomplishment. I had done exactly what was asked of me, with the professionalism and skill I prided myself on. The party began to wind down around 11. Guests departed in pairs and small groups, chauffeured away in luxury cars that purred like contented predators in the night. I helped the kitchen staff with initial cleanup, waiting for Alessio to summon me. "Miss Foster," Mrs. Russo appeared at my elbow. "Mr. Moretti will see you now, in his study." She led me through the quiet house, past rooms filled with art that probably cost more than I would earn in a lifetime, to a heavy wooden door at the end of a long hallway. She knocked once, then opened it without waiting for a response. "Miss Foster, sir," she announced, then stepped aside to let me enter. Alessio's study was exactly what I would have expected. Masculine and elegant, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather furniture, and a massive desk positioned before windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the room. He stood with his back to me, gazing out at the twinkling lights below. He'd removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie, giving him a slightly more relaxed appearance, though no less dangerous. "Your guests seem to enjoy the coffee," I said, breaking the silence. He turned, those amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "They did. You performed admirably. Thank you. If that's all, I should probably stay." He moved to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "Have a drink with me." It wasn't a request. I accepted the glass he offered, the warmth of his fingers brushing against mine momentarily. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the leather armchairs by the fire. I perched on the edge of the chair, sipping the expensive whiskey carefully. It burned pleasantly down my throat, warming me from the inside. Alessio sat opposite me, studying me with unnerving intensity. "Tell me something, Emma. What would you do if you didn't have to worry about money anymore?" The question caught me off guard. I don't understand. It's a simple question. If financial concerns were eliminated, how would you spend your life? I considered this for a moment, wondering why he cared. I'd finished my degree, I suppose. I was studying literature before my father got sick. Literature. He smiled slightly. "You want to be a writer? A professor, actually. I love teaching." The whiskey in the fire had relaxed me enough to speak honestly. There's something magical about opening someone's mind to new ideas, new worlds. He nodded, seeming genuinely interested. "And what happened to your mother? You mentioned your father's illness, but not her." The direct question about my family sent a wave of unease through me. How much did he already know about me? "Cancer," I answered simply. 3 years ago. Something like understanding flickered in his eyes. "I lost my mother young as well." This unexpected glimpse of shared experience made him suddenly seem more human. I had to remind myself who he was, what he was. "Mr. Moretti." "Alessio," he corrected. "Alessio," I repeated, the name feeling strange on my tongue. "It's getting late and I should—" "You'll find an envelope on the desk," he interrupted, gesturing behind me. "Your payment, as agreed." I turned to see a thick manila envelope on the corner of his desk. Standing, I moved to take it, relief washing over me at the thought of the financial breathing room it would provide. "Thank you," I said, slipping it into my handbag. He rose as well, moving closer than necessary. "I have another proposition for you." My guard immediately went up again. "What kind of proposition?" "I want you to come work for me, permanently." I stared at him in confusion. As your barista?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "As my personal assistant, the position pays $15,000 a month, plus benefits, including comprehensive medical coverage that would take care of your father's treatments." The figure stole my breath away. It was more money than I could imagine. And the mention of medical coverage for Dad. How did he know so much about my situation? "Why me?" I asked, suspicion creeping in. "You don't know anything about my qualifications." "I know more than you think," he replied, his voice low. "I know you graduated top of your class before dropping out to care for your father. I know you work harder than anyone at that cafe. I know you're intelligent, observant, and discreet, all qualities I value." A chill ran down my spine. He'd been investigating me. What would this job entail exactly? I asked cautiously. Managing my schedule, handling correspondence, organizing events like tonight's dinner. Essentially, making my life run smoothly. He took a step closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "You would live here, in the staff wing. Your father could receive treatment at the Kingston Private Hospital, the best oncology department in the state." The offer was too perfect, too tailored to my desperate situation. There had to be a catch, and what else would you expect of me? I asked bluntly, meeting his gaze. His eyes darkened. "Only what I've outlined. Despite what you may have heard about me, Emma, I don't force women into my bed. When I take a woman to my bed, she comes willingly." Heat rushed to my face at his directness. "I should go," I said, stepping back. He made no move to stop me. "Think about my offer. I need an answer by Monday. And if I decline?" His expression remained neutral. Then we part ways, and you keep tonight's payment as agreed. I didn't believe it would be that simple. Men like Alessio Moretti weren't accustomed to hearing no. Marco will drive you home, he said, moving to the door and opening it for me. Good night, Emma. I walked past him, careful not to let our bodies touch. Good night, Mr. Moretti. Alessio, he corrected again, his voice following me down the hallway. Marco was waiting by the front entrance, car keys in hand. The drive back to my apartment was silent, my mind racing with thoughts of Alessio's proposition. It was too good to be true, and yet the alternative was watching my father suffer while I drowned in medical debt. When we reached my building, Marco opened my door and handed me a business card. Mr. Moretti's private number, he explained. He asked me to give this to you. I took it hesitantly. Thank you, Marco. Miss Foster, he said as I turned to leave, his voice suddenly earnest. Mr. Moretti he's not always what people think. Just consider his offer carefully. I studied his face, wondering about his relationship with Alessio. How long have you worked for him? 15 years. Since he was just a teenager, there was unmistakable loyalty in his voice. I nodded, tucking the card into my bag alongside the envelope. Good night, Marco. Inside my apartment, I counted the money with trembling hands. $5,000 exactly as promised. I sat on my bed for a long time afterward, the business card with Alessio's number burning a hole in my pocket. What kind of life would it be? Working for a man like him, being at his beck and call, living in his home, surrounded by his world of power and danger. The money would solve my immediate problems. But at what cost to my soul? I fell into a restless sleep, dreaming of amber eyes watching me from shadows. The next morning, I woke to a text from an unknown number. Consider this a down payment on your future. Kingston Hospital, 10 a.m. Your father has an appointment with Dr. Reeves. I sat bolt upright, staring at my phone in disbelief. Alessio had already arranged for Dad to see one of the top oncologists in the country, without my consent. Anger and gratitude warred within me as I dressed quickly and rushed to call my father. He answered on the third ring, his voice weak but excited. Emma, sweetheart, the strangest thing happened. The Kingston Hospital called this morning. They have an opening with a specialist and all the paperwork's been taken care of. Insurance. Everything. They said it was arranged by some foundation. My hands tightened around the phone. That's wonderful, Dad. I'll meet you there, okay? I arrived at the hospital to find my father already being treated like royalty. The staff whisked him away for tests while I waited in a private consultation room, my thoughts a jumbled mess. The door opened, and I expected to see Dr. Reeves. Instead, Alessio Moretti walked in, impeccably dressed in another custom suit, his presence immediately filling the space. You had no right, I said, anger winning out over gratitude. No right to make decisions about my father's care without my permission. He remained calm in the face of my fury. Would you have preferred I wait while you deliberated? Time is precious when it comes to cancer treatment, Emma. That's not the point, I insisted, even as I recognized the truth in his words. You're manipulating me. He stepped closer, his amber eyes intense. I'm offering you a solution to your problems. There's a difference. Why? I demanded, desperation in my voice. Why me? Why go to all this trouble for someone you barely know? Something shifted in his expression. A vulnerability I hadn't seen before, quickly masked. Perhaps I recognize something in you. Something rare. Before I could respond, the door opened again and Dr. Reeves entered, a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes. He greeted Alessio with obvious deference before turning his attention to me. Miss Foster, we've completed your father's initial assessment. I'd like to discuss treatment options with you. Alessio moved toward the door. I'll leave you to it. As he passed me, he leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. Monday, Emma. I'll expect your answer. Then he was gone, leaving me to discuss my father's future with a doctor we could never have afforded without his intervention. The treatment plan Dr. Reeves outlined was comprehensive, innovative, and prohibitively expensive, but apparently, cost was no longer a concern. When I left the hospital hours later, My father comfortably settled in a private room for his first round of treatment. A black car waited at the curb. Marco opened the door without a word. On the seat inside lay a single red rose and another business card. I picked it up, turning it over in my fingers. The message was simple, written in elegant script. "You're mine now." I stared at the card, a chill racing down my spine despite the warmth of the car's interior. "You're mine now." 4 simple words that carried the weight of chains. "Where to, Miss Foster?" Marco asked, his eyes meeting mine briefly in the rearview mirror. I should have been outraged, should have torn the card to pieces and demanded to be taken home. Instead, I found myself saying, "To Mr. Moretti, please." Marco nodded without surprise, as if he'd been expecting this response all along. As we drove through the city toward the hills, I tried to make sense of my own decision. Why was I going to confront Alessio instead of running in the opposite direction? Was it anger? Curiosity? Or something deeper I wasn't ready to acknowledge? The mansion looked different in daylight, less intimidating, more Mediterranean villa than mobster fortress. Sunlight glinted off the fountains, and birds sang in the carefully manicured gardens. It was beautiful, peaceful even, belying the nature of the man who owned it. Marco led me through a side entrance this time, through corridors I hadn't seen the night before. We passed what looked like a state-of-the-art gym, a home theater, and several closed doors, before reaching a sunlit atrium with a swimming pool at its center. The space was enclosed in glass, offering panoramic views of the bay below while maintaining perfect climate control. Alessio was swimming laps with powerful, efficient strokes. His muscular body cut through the water with grace that seemed at odds with his intimidating presence on land. Marco cleared his throat, and Alessio paused, looking up to see us standing at the edge of the pool. "Emma," he said, surprise evident in his voice. He swam to the edge and pulled himself out of the water in one fluid motion. I tried not to stare at his body, now on full display. Water cascaded down his chest, highlighting the defined muscles of his torso and the intricate tattoos that covered much of his right shoulder and arm, Italian phrases interwoven with what looked like family crests and religious imagery. A long scar ran diagonally across his left ribcage, puckered and pale against his tanned skin. It looked like a knife wound. He reached for a towel, casually drying himself while I stood awkwardly clutching the card in my hand. "I didn't expect you today," he said, draping the towel around his neck. "Clearly," I replied, finally finding my voice. I held up the card. "What is this supposed to mean?" His eyes flicked to the card, then back to my face. "A reminder." "Of what exactly? That you think you can buy people?" A flicker of amusement crossed his features. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Aren't you?" I challenged, heat rising to my cheeks. "The money, Dad's treatment, it's all designed to put me in your debt." He stepped closer, still dripping, seemingly unconcerned with his near nakedness. "I'm offering you a way out of an impossible situation, Emma, nothing more. And this?" I waved the card. "You're mine now?" That sounds like ownership, not employment. Something darkened in his gaze. Perhaps it was poorly phrased. Perhaps it was exactly as you intended. We stared at each other, tension crackling between us like static electricity. I was acutely aware of his physical proximity, of the droplets of water still clinging to his skin. "Let me change," he said finally, breaking the standoff. "We'll talk in my study." He gestured to Marco, who had been standing discreetly by the entrance. "Show Miss Foster to the terrace and get her something to drink. I'll join her shortly." Marco led me through the house to a stunning outdoor terrace overlooking the bay. Comfortable seating was arranged around a fire pit, and flowering vines climbed elegant trellises, providing dappled shade from the midday sun. The view was breathtaking, the city spread out below, the blue water of the bay stretching to the horizon. "What can I get you to drink, Miss Foster?" Marco asked. "Just water, please," I replied, sinking onto one of the cushioned chairs. My legs felt suddenly weak, the adrenaline of confrontation draining away. As Marco left to fetch my water, I took deep breaths, trying to organize my thoughts. What was I doing here? What did I hope to accomplish? And why did my heart race every time Alessio looked at me with those intense amber eyes? The terrace door slid open, and Alessio emerged, now dressed in casual linen pants and a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. His hair was still damp, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. He looked younger, more approachable like this, though no less dangerous. He sat across from me, stretching his long legs out before him. Marco returned with 2 glasses of water, setting them on the table between us before disappearing back into the house. "Your father is comfortable?" Alessio asked, breaking the silence. The genuine concern in his voice caught me off guard. "Yes, Doctor. Reeves says the new treatment protocol has a high success rate for his type of cancer." "Good." He took a sip of water. "Dr. Reeves is the best. Why are you doing this?" I asked, the question that had been burning in me since the hospital. The truth this time, not some vague line about recognizing something in me. Alessio studied me for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "You remind me of someone," he said finally. "Someone I couldn't save." The admission surprised me. "Who?" "My sister." Pain flashed across his face, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. She was diagnosed with leukemia at 16. My father, he refused certain treatments on religious grounds. By the time I could legally intervene, it was too late. I hadn't expected this vulnerability, this glimpse of very human pain. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, the casual gesture at odds with the emotion I'd glimpsed. "It was a long time ago, so this is—" "What? Redemption? Call it what you want," he replied. "The fact remains that I can help your father in ways you can't. All I'm asking in return is your service." "Service," I repeated, the word tasting strange on my tongue. "As your assistant." "Yes." "Nothing more?" His eyes darkened. "I told you before, I don't force women. But you expect me to eventually warm to your bed," I said bluntly. "That's part of the unspoken arrangement, isn't it?" He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "What happens between us will be based entirely on mutual desire, Emma. Nothing more, nothing less." Heat bloomed in my chest at his words, at the implication that he desired me. It was madness. He was dangerous, powerful, everything I should be running from. And yet, "I need time to think," I said, looking away from the intensity of his stare. "You have until Monday," he reminded me. "But know this. Your father's treatment will continue regardless of your decision. That's not conditional." The statement should have relieved me, but instead, it only deepened my confusion. If he wasn't using Dad's health to manipulate me, what game was he playing? "Why the card then?" I asked. "Why you're mine now if you're not trying to own me?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Perhaps I was testing you." "Testing what?" "Whether you'd run or confront me." His smile widened slightly. "You didn't disappoint." Before I could respond, the terrace door opened, and Mrs. Russo appeared. "Pardon the interruption, Mr. Moretti, but Mr. Cavallaro has arrived for your meeting." Alessio's expression hardened instantly, the glimpse of humanity I'd been granted vanishing behind his usual mask of control. "Tell him I'll be there momentarily." Mrs. Russo nodded and withdrew. Alessio stood, buttoning the cuffs of his shirt with precise movements. "Business calls," he said. "Marco will drive you home." I rose as well, suddenly aware of how presumptuous I'd been, showing up unannounced at his home. "I'm sorry for interrupting your day." "Don't be." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the clean scent of his soap. "I'm glad you came." Without warning, he reached out, his fingertips brushing a strand of hair from my face with surprising gentleness. The brief contact sent electricity through me, leaving my skin tingling. "Monday, Emma," he said softly, his voice a caress. "I'll expect your answer." Then he was gone, striding purposefully back into the house, leaving me breathless and more confused than ever. On the drive home, I tried to make sense of everything I'd learned. The glimpse of personal tragedy, the pain he'd revealed about his sister, complicated my image of him. Could a man who built an empire on violence and fear also be capable of compassion? And why did the thought of working closely with him, of living in his home, fill me with both trepidation and anticipation? The weekend passed in a blur of hospital visits and restless nights. Dad responded well to the initial treatment, his spirits lifting for the first time in months. I couldn't bring myself to tell him about Alessio's proposition or the source of his miraculous medical care. Instead, I let him believe the story about a charitable foundation, guilt gnawing at me with each grateful smile he gave me. By Monday morning, I still hadn't reached a decision. I dressed mechanically for my shift at the cafe, my mind elsewhere as I served the usual morning customers their coffees and pastries. Mr. Ricci noticed my distraction, asking twice if I was feeling ill. Just tired, I assured him, forcing a smile. The morning rush had just subsided when the cafe door opened, admitting a gust of cool air and the last person I expected to see. Alessio Moretti stood in the doorway, alone this time, dressed impeccably in a gray suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. The cafe fell silent as he crossed to the counter, every eye following his movement. Even Mr. Ricci seemed frozen in place, recognition and fear flashing across his normally jovial face. "Emma," Alessio greeted me, his voice carrying in the hushed space. "I've come for your answer." I stared at him in disbelief. "Now?" "Here, now," he confirmed, glancing around the cafe with casual assessment. "Unless you'd prefer privacy," Mr. Ricci suddenly found his voice. "Emma, take your break," he urged, his eyes wide with alarm. "Use my office." I nodded gratefully, untying my apron with trembling fingers. "This way," I told Alessio, leading him through the swinging door into the back of the cafe, acutely aware of the stairs following us. Mr. Ricci's office was little more than a closet with a desk, but it offered the privacy we needed. I closed the door behind us, then turned to face Alessio, who seemed impossibly large in the cramped space. "You couldn't have called?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Now everyone will talk. Let them," he replied with casual dismissal. "Your time here is done anyway." His assumption ignited a flare of anger in me. "I haven't given you my answer yet, haven't you?" His amber eyes held mine, searching. "I can see it in your face, Emma. You've made your decision. Had I?" Even as I opened my mouth to protest, I knew he was right. The decision had been made the moment I saw my father's hope restored, perhaps even earlier, the first time those amber eyes had locked with mine. "Yes," I said finally, the word barely audible. "I accept your offer." Something flashed in his eyes. Triumph, satisfaction, perhaps even relief. "Good. When can you start?" "I need to give notice, at least a week." 2 days, he interrupted. "I'll compensate Mr. Ricci generously for the inconvenience." I wanted to argue but found I lacked the energy. This was my new reality now, Alessio Moretti making decisions, rearranging my life to suit his needs. I would have to choose my battles carefully. "Fine," I conceded. 2 days. "Excellent." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, placing it on Mr. Ricci's cluttered desk. "Your contract. Sign it today. A copy has already been sent to your email." I made no move to take it. "I'd like to read it first." A smile tugged at his lips, of course. I would expect nothing less. He turned to leave, then paused, his hand on the doorknob. "One more thing, Emma." "Yes?" "I'll have Marco pick you up at your apartment tomorrow evening. 7 o'clock. Dress formally." I frowned. "For what?" "Dinner," he said simply. "With me, to discuss the details of your new position." Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving only the envelope and the lingering scent of his cologne. Through the glass panel in the door, I watched him exit the cafe, nodding briefly to Mr. Ricci before disappearing into the street. My new boss. My new life. What had I just agreed to? The next 2 days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. I gave Mr. Ricci my notice, enduring his concerned questions with vague answers about a new opportunity. I visited Dad at the hospital, finding him improving steadily under Dr. Reeves's care. I packed my modest belongings, gave notice to my landlord, and said goodbye to my roommate Jess, who couldn't hide her concern when I explained I'd be moving into my employer's home. "Are you sure about this, Em?" she asked, worry etched on her face. "I mean, everyone knows who Alessio Moretti is." "The things they say he's done, it's just a job, Jess," I insisted, not meeting her eyes. "A really well-paying job that includes housing and medical benefits for Dad. I'd be crazy to turn it down." She didn't look convinced, but she hugged me tightly. "Just be careful, okay? And call me. Often." At 7 o'clock on Tuesday evening, Marco arrived as promised. He helped load my 2 suitcases into the trunk of the sleek black car, his usual stoic expression softening slightly. "Ready, Miss Foster?" he asked as he held the door open for me. I took one last look at my apartment building, at the life I was leaving behind. As ready as I'll ever be, the drive to Alessio's mansion felt different this time, no longer a temporary visit, but a journey to my new home. I wore the same black dress from the dinner party, having splurged on a pair of simple pearl earrings to replace Jess's borrowed ones. My hair fell in loose waves down my back, and I'd taken extra care with my makeup, though I told myself it was simply professional preparation for a dinner with my new employer. When we arrived, Mrs. Russo was waiting at the entrance. She greeted me with a reserved smile, then led me through the house to what would be my new quarters in the staff wing. "Mr. Moretti insisted you have one of the guest suites rather than standard staff accommodations," she explained, as she opened a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with an attached sitting area and private bathroom. I stepped inside, stunned by the luxury. The room was elegantly appointed in cream and pale blue, with a king-sized bed, plush seating, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. Fresh flowers stood on a side table, their subtle fragrance perfuming the air. "This is too much," I said, turning to Mrs. Russo. She shrugged, a knowing look in her eyes. "Mr. Moretti wants you comfortable." She showed me how to operate the climate controls, the entertainment system, and the intercom. "Mr. Moretti is waiting for you on the terrace for dinner," she said as she prepared to leave. "Do you need time to freshen up?" I glanced at myself in the ornate mirror above the dresser. "No, I'm ready." "Very well. I'll show you the way." The terrace had been transformed since my visit 2 days ago. A table for 2 had been set up near the edge, offering the best view of the bay. Candles flickered in glass hurricanes, and a bottle of wine breathed in an ice bucket. The setting was unmistakably intimate, not an employer-employee dinner, but something far more personal. Alessio stood at the railing, gazing out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. He turned as we approached, and the intensity of his gaze as it traveled over me sent heat rushing to my cheeks. "Emma," he greeted me, moving forward to pull out my chair. "You look lovely." "Thank you," I murmured, taking my seat. Mrs. Russo disappeared silently, leaving us alone with the view and the candles and the growing tension between us. "Wine?" Alessio offered, already reaching for the bottle. I nodded, watching as he poured 2 glasses with practiced ease. His movements were precise, controlled, like everything else about him. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. I touched my glass to his, the crystal making a delicate chime. New beginnings. As I took a sip of the undoubtedly expensive wine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just sealed a pact that went far beyond employment, one that would alter the course of my life in ways I couldn't begin to imagine. "Welcome home, Emma," Alessio said softly, his amber eyes reflecting the candlelight as they held mine captive across the table. "Home." The word echoed in my mind as I looked out over the glittering city below, the vast mansion behind me and the dangerous, enigmatic man before me. What kind of home had I just entered? And at what cost? My first week in Alessio Moretti's home passed in a blur of new routines and adjustments. Each morning, I woke in my luxurious suite, still startled by the softness of the sheets and the view of the bay from my windows. Mrs. Russo would bring coffee precisely at 7, her gentle knock becoming a familiar start to my day. By 8, I would be in Alessio's study, reviewing his schedule, responding to correspondence, and learning the intricate dance of managing the affairs of one of the city's most powerful men. The work itself was demanding, but straightforward. Alessio was meticulous and expected the same precision from those around him. He operated in multiple worlds simultaneously. Legitimate businesses including real estate, shipping, and several high-end restaurants, alongside other ventures I suspected were less than legal, though he never discussed those directly with me. My role kept me largely insulated from the darker aspects of his empire. I arranged meetings, organized his calendar, handled travel arrangements, and ensured his household ran smoothly. If men with hard eyes and bulges under their jackets occasionally appeared for closed-door meetings, I pretended not to notice. If phone calls came in that Alessio took in Italian, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, I busied myself with other tasks. It was a bargain I'd made with myself. Do the job, take the money, see Dad healthy again, and don't ask questions I didn't want answers to. Alessio himself remained an enigma. Professional and courteous during working hours, he maintained a careful distance that contradicted the intensity of our dinner that first evening. There had been moments during that meal when the air between us had crackled with unspoken tension, when his eyes had lingered on my lips or the curve of my neck, when his fingers had brushed mine as he passed the bread, but afterward, he had simply thanked me for a pleasant evening and had Marco escort me to my suite. Since then, our interactions had been almost exclusively business-related. If not for the occasional heated glance or the way he sometimes stood too close when looking over my shoulder at something on my computer screen, I might have thought I'd imagined the attraction entirely. On my 8th day, everything changed. I was working late, finalizing details for a charity gala Alessio would be attending the following weekend. The house was quiet, most of the staff having retired for the evening. I'd lost track of time, absorbed in creating a briefing document with information about the other attendees, something Alessio insisted upon for any public event. Still working? His voice from the doorway startled me. I looked up to find him leaning against the frame, jacket removed, tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked more relaxed than I'd seen him all week, though no less intimidating. Just finishing the briefing for the Children's Hospital Gala, I explained, saving the document. I want to make sure you have all the background on the key donors. He crossed to my desk, glancing at the screen over my shoulder. At 11:30 at night. Was it that late? I checked my watch, surprised. I didn't realize the time. You work too hard, he said, settling on the edge of my desk. The casual posture brought him close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath, mingled with his cologne. That makes 2 of us. I smiled tentatively. Occupational hazard, I guess. He studied me for a moment, his amber eyes thoughtful in the soft lamplight. Come have a drink with me, he said suddenly. You've earned it. I hesitated, aware of the blurring line between professional and personal. But something in his expression, a rare vulnerability, perhaps even loneliness, made me nod. Let me just save this and shut down. He led me to his private study, a room I'd only entered for formal meetings. At this late hour, with just the 2 of us, it felt more intimate, the leather furniture gleaming in the warm light from the fireplace, the city twinkling below through the wall of windows. Alessio poured me a measure of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. Macallan 25, he said, handing me the glass. Too good to drink alone. I accepted it, our fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Thank you. He gestured for me to sit on one of the leather sofas, then took a seat beside me rather than across from me as I'd expected. The proximity sent a flutter through my stomach that had nothing to do with the whiskey. How are you settling in? He asked, his voice lower, more personal than his usual business tone. Well, I think. Everyone has been very kind. I took a sip of whiskey, letting the rich, smoky flavor roll across my tongue. Mrs. Russo seems to have adopted me. Alessio smiled, the expression softening his features. She's protective of everyone in this house, myself included. How long has she worked for you? She worked for my father first, then stayed on after... He paused, something darkening in his eyes. After I took over. The unspoken story hung in the air between us. I knew from rumors and whispered conversations among the staff that Alessio had ascended to power following his father's violent death, but no one seemed to know the exact circumstances. You've been to see your father? He asked, changing the subject. I nodded, grateful for the shift. 3 times this week. He's responding well to the treatment. Dr. Reeves is very optimistic. Good. His expression was genuinely pleased. I'm glad. Thank you, I said softly, for making it possible. Whatever your reasons, I'm grateful. He studied me over the rim of his glass. You don't trust my explanation. It wasn't a question. I met his gaze directly. I think there's more to it than you've told me. Perhaps. He shifted slightly, his knee brushing against mine, whether accidental or deliberate. The contact sent a shock of awareness through me. Does it matter? As long as your father gets well? I suppose not, I conceded. But you'd still like to know. His voice held a hint of amusement. You're curious about me. Heat rose to my cheeks at his directness. You're my employer. It's natural to want to understand who I'm working for. Is that all it is? Professional curiosity? The question hung between us, loaded with implication. I took another sip of whiskey, buying time, unsure how to navigate this dangerous territory. You're not what I expected, I admitted finally. No? His eyes never left my face. What did you expect? Someone colder, more ruthless. I hesitated, then added, less human. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. And what do you see instead? Someone complicated, I answered honestly. Someone with layers I don't understand yet. He leaned closer, the movement subtle but deliberate. Would you like to understand them? My breath caught in my throat. We had crossed into territory that was decidedly not professional, and I knew I should retreat, establish boundaries, remind him of our working relationship. Instead, I heard myself say, yes. Something sparked in his eyes, triumph, perhaps, or satisfaction. He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face in a mirror of his gesture from the day on the terrace. This time, though, his touch lingered, tracing the curve of my jaw with feather-light pressure. You fascinate me, Emma, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. From the first moment I saw you at that cafe, something about you called to me. Why? I asked, the word barely audible. His thumb brushed across my lower lip, sending electricity coursing through my body. Your strength, your determination, the fire I see in your eyes when you're challenged. His gaze dropped to my mouth. Your beauty, which you seem entirely unaware of. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded him of our professional relationship, of the power imbalance between us, of all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Instead, I remained frozen, caught in the magnetic pull of his gaze, my body responding traitorously to his touch. The shrill ring of his phone shattered the moment. Alessio's expression hardened instantly as he checked the caller ID. He stood, putting distance between us. I need to take this, he said, all traces of intimacy gone from his voice. I nodded, relief and disappointment warring within me. Of course. I should get some sleep anyway. He answered the phone as I rose to leave, his voice shifting to rapid Italian, tension evident in his stance. At the door, I glanced back to see him staring out the window, one hand clenched at his side, power and danger radiating from him in palpable waves. This was who he really was, not the man who had just tenderly touched my face, but a man who moved in a world of violence and secrets. I had been foolish to forget it, even for a moment. Back in my suite, I pressed my fingers to my lips, still feeling the ghost of his touch. What game was he playing? And more disturbingly, why was I so willing to play along? Sleep eluded me that night, my dreams when they finally came filled with amber eyes and whispered promises. The next morning, Alessio was gone before I arrived at his study. Mrs. Russo informed me he had early meetings in the city and wouldn't return until evening. I tried to ignore my relief at the reprieve, focusing instead on my tasks for the day. Around noon, Marco appeared at my office door. Miss Foster, Mr. Moretti asked me to take you to lunch. I looked up in surprise. With him? No, miss. He had another engagement, but he thought you might enjoy Lucia's. It's his favorite restaurant. The gesture was thoughtful, if unexpected. I accepted, grateful for a break from the house and the chance to clear my head. Lucia's turned out to be a charming Italian trattoria in the city's North Beach district, tucked away on a quiet side street. The maitre d' recognized Marco immediately and led us to a secluded table in the back, announcing that Mr. Moretti's special menu would be served. He comes here often? I asked Marco once we were seated. Marco nodded, his usually stoic expression softening. Since he was a boy, Lucia was his mother's cousin. The place is special to him. It was the most personal information Marco had ever volunteered about Alessio. Encouraged, I ventured, "How did you come to work for him?" Marco studied me for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. I was 19, in trouble with a rival family. Alessio's father offered protection, A job, he shrugged. I've been with the Morettis ever since. You're loyal to him, I observed. Not just as an employee. He's a good man, Marco said simply, then seemed to catch himself in his own way. Before I could ask what he meant, the first course arrived, delicate arancini with truffle and parmesan, followed by handmade pappardelle with wild boar ragout, each dish more exquisite than the last. I found myself relaxing in the warm atmosphere, even sharing a laugh with Marco over his stories of Alessio as a young man. He was different then, Marco said, a faraway look in his eyes. Before his sister died, before his father. He trailed off, seeming to realize he'd said too much. I waited, hoping he would continue, but he changed the subject, asking about my father's progress instead. After lunch, rather than returning directly to the mansion, Marco drove me to the hospital at my request. Dad was sitting up in bed when I arrived, color in his cheeks for the first time in months. "There's my girl," he greeted me, reaching for my hand. "I was hoping you'd visit today." I spent an hour with him, carefully avoiding any mention of Alessio or my new living arrangements. I'd told Dad I'd taken an administrative position with a private firm, letting him assume I'd found my own apartment closer to work. The lies tasted bitter, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth, that his recovery was being funded by one of the city's most notorious figures, and that I was now living in that man's house. When I returned to the mansion that evening, I found a note on my desk in Alessio's distinctive handwriting. "Join me for dinner, 8 p.m. A." Simple, direct, not a request so much as an expectation. I considered declining, sending a message that last night's intimate moment had been a mistake. But curiosity won out, along with something deeper I wasn't ready to name. At 8, I made my way to the terrace, where we had shared our first dinner together. This time, there was no elaborate setup, just a simple table with candles and place settings for two. Alessio was already there, gazing out at the bay, a glass of wine in hand. He turned as I approached, his eyes moving appreciatively over my simple blue dress. "You look lovely," he said, moving to pull out my chair. "Thank you." I took my seat, hyper-aware of his proximity as he pushed in my chair. "How were your meetings?" "Productive." He poured wine into my glass, but that's not what I want to discuss tonight. I took a sip of wine to steady my nerves. "What do you want to discuss?" He sat across from me, his amber eyes intent. "Us." The directness shouldn't have surprised me. Alessio never seemed one for games or pretense, but it still caught me off guard. "There is no us," I said carefully. "I work for you." "Is that all it is?" he challenged, echoing his question from the previous night. I met his gaze evenly. "It's all it should be." "Should," he repeated, a smile playing at his lips, "but not what you want." "What I want doesn't matter," I countered. "The power dynamic between us makes anything else complicated." "Life is complicated, Emma." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "But some things are simple. The way you respond when I touch you, that's simple. The way your pupils dilate when I step too close, that's simple too." Heat rushed to my cheeks at his blunt assessment. "Attraction isn't enough." "No," he agreed surprisingly. "It's just the beginning." Mrs. Russo appeared with our first course, temporarily halting the dangerous conversation. Throughout the meal, we talked of safer topics, books we'd read, places we'd traveled, music we enjoyed. I was surprised to discover Alessio had a passion for classical literature and played the piano, facets of him that didn't align with his ruthless reputation. It was only after dessert, as we lingered over coffee, that he returned to the subject of us. "I'm not asking you to share my bed, Emma," he said, his directness making me choke slightly on my coffee. "Not yet. I'm asking you to let me court you properly." I stared at him in disbelief. "Court me? Like we're in a Jane Austen novel?" A smile curved his lips. "Would you prefer I seduce you? Because that was my alternate plan." Despite everything, I found myself laughing. "You're impossible." "I know what I want," he corrected, reaching across the table to take my hand. His thumb traced circles on my palm, sending shivers up my arm. "And I'm willing to be patient to get it." "And what is it you want exactly?" I asked, my voice embarrassingly breathy. His eyes darkened. All of you, Emma, not just your body, though I want that too. His fingers tightened around mine. I want your mind, your heart, your trust. I want you to be mine in every way that matters. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it sent a thrill through me that I couldn't entirely suppress. I barely know you, I whispered. Then get to know me, he challenged. Give me a chance to show you who I really am, beyond the rumors and reputation. I withdrew my hand from his, needing space to think clearly. And if I'm not interested in being yours? Something flashed in his eyes, not anger, but determination. Then I'll accept that. Your job, your father's treatment, none of that changes. I told you before I don't force women. I believed him, strangely enough. For all his power and dangerous reputation, I sensed an iron code of honor in Alessio that extended to certain boundaries he wouldn't cross. I need time, I said finally. He nodded, accepting my non-answer with grace. Time you shall have, but know this, Emma. His voice dropped, sending shivers down my spine. I'm a patient man, but my patience has limits, and I find myself increasingly impatient where you're concerned. The warning, or promise, lingered between us as we finished our coffee in charged silence. When I finally rose to leave, he walked me to the entrance of the staff wing, stopping at the threshold. Good night, Emma, he said softly. Good night, Alessio. I was halfway down the corridor when his voice stopped me. Emma. I turned back. He stood watching me, power and restraint evident in his posture. Dream of me, he said, the words both command and plea. As I slipped into my room and closed the door, I knew with unsettling certainty that I would. The weeks that followed settled into a strange dance of professional efficiency and simmering tension. By day, I was Alessio's competent assistant, managing his affairs with increasing confidence. By night, we shared dinners on the terrace or in the formal dining room, conversations that ranged from literature to philosophy to memories of our childhoods. True to his word, he didn't pressure me physically, though his eyes often lingered on my lips when I spoke, and he found excuses to touch me. A hand at the small of my back when guiding me through a doorway, fingers brushing mine when passing documents, a kiss on my knuckles when saying goodnight. It was a slow, deliberate seduction, all the more effective for its restraint. I visited Dad regularly, delighting in his steady improvement. The hollows in his cheeks filled out, color returned to his complexion, and his laugh, a sound I hadn't heard in months, became frequent again. Dr. Reeves spoke of remission as a real possibility, not just a distant hope. It's a miracle, Dad said one afternoon as we sat in the hospital garden. I never thought I'd feel this good again. Guilt twisted in my stomach at his innocent joy. The new treatment is working wonders. It's more than that. He squeezed my hand. It's having hope again. Seeing you happy too. Was I happy? The question followed me back to the mansion that evening. I had comfort, security, fascinating work, and Dad was getting well. All things that should equal happiness. But beneath it all ran an undercurrent of tension. Not just from my complicated feelings for Alessio, but from glimpses of his other life I couldn't continue to ignore. Like the night I came upon him in his study, speaking harshly in Italian to a man who cowered before him. Or the morning his knuckles were bruised, though he offered no explanation. Or the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. I was living in a beautiful cage, willfully blind to the predator who owned it. The fragile equilibrium shattered on the night of the Children's Hospital Gala. Alessio had been tense all day, taking calls behind closed doors, his jaw set in a hard line whenever I saw him. Still, he insisted on attending the charity event as planned, with me accompanying him to manage logistics and introductions. I wore a gown he had sent up to my room that morning, midnight blue silk that draped elegantly from one shoulder, leaving the other bare. When I emerged from my suite, he was waiting in the foyer, resplendent in a black tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean strength. His eyes darkened as they traveled over me. Beautiful, he said simply, offering his arm. The gala was held at the city's Grand Hotel, its ballroom transformed into a winter wonderland of silver and blue. As Alessio's assistant, I moved through the crowd with practiced ease, making introductions, handling minor issues, ensuring everything ran smoothly. As the night progressed, I noticed Alessio growing increasingly distracted, checking his phone frequently, his eyes scanning the room with predatory alertness. "Is everything all right?" I asked during a quiet moment. "Fine," he replied tersely. Then, seeing my expression, softened his tone. "Just business that couldn't wait." Nothing for you to worry about, but I did worry, especially when I noticed Marco and another of Alessio's security men, positioned strategically at the ballroom entrances, hands inside their jackets, eyes constantly moving. The evening was winding down when it happened. Alessio had just finished speaking with the hospital director when his phone buzzed. He checked the screen, his expression hardening instantly. "We need to leave," he said, his hand closing firmly around my elbow. "Now." "What's wrong?" I asked, alarmed by the urgency in his voice. "I'll explain in the car." He guided me swiftly toward the nearest exit, Marco materializing beside us as if summoned. As we reached the door, a commotion erupted at the main entrance of the ballroom. Shouting, then the sharp crack of what could only be gunfire. Screams filled the air as people dove for cover. Alessio's reaction was instantaneous. He shoved me behind him, his body a shield as Marco drew a weapon from beneath his jacket. "Get her out," Alessio ordered Marco. "Take her home, lock it down. And you?" Marco asked, his face grim. "I'll handle this." Alessio turned to me, his eyes fierce. "Go with Marco. Do exactly as he says, Alessio." Fear clutched at my throat. "Go," he commanded, then softened, touching my cheek briefly. "Please, Emma. I need to know you're safe." More shouting. Another crack of gunfire. Marco grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a service corridor as Alessio moved in the opposite direction, toward the chaos. The last glimpse I had of him was his tall figure cutting through panicked guests, purpose in every line of his body. Marco hustled me through the kitchen and out a back entrance where a car was already waiting, engine running. He pushed me into the back seat, then slid behind the wheel, speeding away from the hotel with screeching tires. "What's happening?" I demanded, heart pounding. "Who's shooting? Is Alessio in danger?" Marco's eyes met mine briefly in the rearview mirror. "Rival family," he said tersely. "They've been pushing boundaries for months. Now they've crossed a line." "By attacking a charity gala?" Horror filled me at the thought of innocent people caught in the crossfire. "There are children there, doctors, donors. They weren't after civilians," Marco interrupted. "They were after him." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Someone had tried to kill Alessio, was still trying, while I was being whisked to safety. "We have to go back," I insisted, panic rising. "We can't just leave him there." "Mr. Moretti gave me an order," Marco said firmly. "Get you to safety. He can take care of himself." I slumped back against the seat, fear and helplessness washing over me. What if Alessio was hurt? What if he was killed? The thought sent a pain through my chest so sharp it stole my breath. When had he become so important to me? When had the idea of losing him become unbearable? Marco drove with grim concentration, taking a circuitous route back to the mansion. When we arrived, the security presence had doubled. Men with guns patrolled the grounds, and additional guards stood at every entrance. "Go to your room and stay there," Marco instructed as he escorted me inside. "I'll come for you when it's safe." "Safe?" I repeated, fear making my voice sharp. "When will that be?" "When Alessio returns." "If he returns?" Marco's expression softened slightly. "He'll return, Miss Foster. He always does." Alone in my suite, I paced like a caged animal, jumping at every sound, checking my phone obsessively though I knew Alessio wouldn't call. Hours passed with no word. I changed out of my gown into comfortable leggings and a sweater, but sleep was impossible. All I could think about was Alessio, facing danger while I hid in luxury. It was nearly dawn when I heard it. The sound of cars in the driveway, doors slamming, voices. I rushed to the window in time to see Alessio emerge from a black SUV, flanked by several men. Even from a distance, I could see blood on his white shirt, though he walked without assistance. Relief crashed over me so intensely my knees nearly buckled. He was alive. Hurt, but alive. Without thinking, I ran from my room, through the silent house to the main entrance. As I reached the foyer, Alessio was coming through the door, his tuxedo jacket gone, his shirt stained with blood, a cut above his eyebrow still seeping. He stopped short when he saw me, surprise flickering across his face. "Emma." My name was rough in his throat. "You should be asleep." "You're hurt," I said, moving toward him instinctively. He waved away my concern, not my blood, mostly. The casual dismissal of violence should have horrified me. Instead, all I felt was overwhelming relief that he was standing before me, alive and relatively unharmed. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His expression darkened. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with." "People were shooting at you," I insisted. "I think that concerns me." Something flashed in his eyes, surprise perhaps, at my boldness, or at the implication that his safety mattered to me. "The situation has been handled," he said after a moment, his voice carefully controlled. "It won't happen again." The coldness in his tone sent a chill through me. What did handled mean? How many people had died tonight because of the world Alessio inhabited? The world I had willingly entered. "You should get some rest," he continued, already turning away. "We can discuss this tomorrow." "No." The word escaped before I could stop it. "We discuss it now." He paused, turning back with dangerous slowness. The men around us seemed to fade into the shadows, sensing a private confrontation. "You're giving me orders now?" His voice was soft, but with an edge that reminded me exactly who he was. I should have backed down. Any sane person would have, but fear and relief and weeks of tension had stripped away my caution. "I thought I was going to lose you tonight," I said, the raw honesty of the words surprising us both. I deserved to know why. Something shifted in his expression, the coldness melting into something more complex. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded to his men. "Leave us." They disappeared without a word, leaving us alone in the vast foyer. Alessio moved to the bar cart in the adjacent sitting room, pouring himself a measure of whiskey with steady hands. He didn't offer me one. "The Cavallaro family has been testing boundaries for months," he said after taking a long sip. "Tonight they made their move, thinking a public venue would give them advantage." "And did it?" I asked quietly. A grim smile curved his lips. "No, they miscalculated. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know how many of the Cavallaro family had paid for that miscalculation with their lives." "Why?" I asked instead. "Why attack you at all? Territory, power." He shrugged, as if discussing business strategy rather than violence. The usual reasons men fight wars. "And now?" "Now they know better than to challenge me." The coldness was back in his voice, reminding me of who he was beneath the cultured veneer, a man who had clawed his way to the top of a violent world and would do whatever necessary to stay there. "Is it over?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "For now. These things never truly end, Emma. There's always someone ready to test the boundaries, to take what isn't theirs." A chill ran through me at his words. This wasn't a one-time incident. It was the reality of his life, of the life I'd stepped into. "I can't do this," I whispered, the realization crashing over me. "I can't live like this, waiting for the next attack, wondering if you'll come home alive." Something vulnerable flashed across his face before his expression hardened again. "You knew who I was when you came here." "I knew what you did," I corrected. I didn't understand what it meant. He set down his glass and moved toward me, stopping close enough that I could smell blood and gunpowder mingled with his cologne. "And now that you do, will you run?" The question hung between us, weighted with everything unspoken. I should run. Any sane person would pack their bags and flee this dangerous world I'd stumbled into, and yet, I don't want to, I admitted, the truth tearing from somewhere deep inside me. "That's what terrifies me most. I should want to run from you, from all of this. But I don't." His eyes darkened, pupils dilating. "Why?" "Because I care about you," I whispered. "God help me, but I do." He reached for me then, one hand cupping my face with surprising gentleness. "Emma," he breathed, my name a prayer on his lips. Then his mouth was on mine, fierce and hungry, as if he'd been holding himself back for too long. I should have pulled away, should have maintained the last shreds of my resistance. Instead, I melted into him, my arms winding around his neck as I returned his kiss with equal fervor. He tasted of whiskey and danger, his body hard and unyielding against mine. One hand tangled in my hair, the other at the small of my back, pressing me closer until there was no space between us, just heat and need and the thundering of my heart. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that since the first day at the cafe," he confessed. "I know," I said, surprised to find I was smiling despite everything. His thumb traced my lower lip, his eyes intent on my face. "Come to my bed tonight," he said. The words both question and command. Every rational thought screamed that this was madness, that I was crossing a line I could never uncross, binding myself irrevocably to a man whose world was filled with violence and danger. But rationality had long since lost its hold on me where Alessio was concerned. "Yes," I whispered. The single word seemed to ignite something in him. He swept me into his arms with surprising strength, carrying me up the grand staircase toward the wing I had never entered, his private quarters. His bedroom was exactly as I'd imagined, masculine and elegant, dominated by a massive four-poster bed with dark silk sheets. He set me down gently beside it, his eyes never leaving mine as he began to unbutton his blood-stained shirt. "Are you sure?" he asked, giving me one last chance to retreat. In answer, I reached for the hem of my sweater, pulling it over my head in a single fluid motion. His breath caught audibly as his gaze traveled over my exposed skin. "God, you're beautiful," he murmured, shrugging off his shirt to reveal the muscled torso I'd glimpsed that day at the pool, now marked with fresh bruises and older scars that told the story of the violent life he led. I stepped closer, tracing a particularly vicious scar that ran across his ribs. "Does it hurt?" He caught my hand, pressing it flat against his chest where his heart thundered beneath my palm. "Only when I thought I might lose you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "When Marco told me you were safe, that he'd gotten you out, that was the moment I could breathe again." The admission undid something in me, some final resistance crumbling away. I rose on tiptoes to press my lips to his. A softer kiss this time, filled with all the feelings I couldn't yet put into words. He responded with gentle restraint at first, as if afraid I might shatter in his hands. But as I pressed closer, my body making my intentions clear, the restraint gave way to hunger. His kisses grew deeper, more demanding, his hands moving over my body with increasing urgency. We fell onto the silk sheets together, clothing discarded, skin against skin, the last barriers between us dissolving in heat and need. He touched me with reverent hands, as if memorizing every curve, every sensitive spot that made me gasp. I explored him in turn, learning the geography of his body, the hard planes of muscle, the rough texture of scars, the places that made his breath catch when I touched them. When he finally moved over me, his weight supported on his arms, his amber eyes locked with mine, I felt as if I were falling into something I couldn't control, and no longer wanted to. "You're mine now," he whispered against my lips, echoing the words from the card that had once frightened me. "Say it, Emma. Say you're mine." In that moment, with his body poised above mine, I knew there was only one answer I could give. "I'm yours," I breathed. "And you're mine." Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes. "Yes," he agreed, sealing the vow with a kiss as our bodies joined at last. Afterward, we lay tangled in the silk sheets, my head pillowed on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my bare back. Outside, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold visible through the wall of windows. "What happens now?" I asked softly, trailing my fingers along the tattoo that covered his right shoulder. He caught my hand, bringing it to his lips. "Now you stay with me, not as my assistant, but as my woman." "Your woman," I repeated, testing how the words felt. "That sounds very old-fashioned." A smile curved his lips. "I'm an old-fashioned man in some ways." "And your world?" I couldn't help asking. "The danger, the violence, that doesn't go away just because I'm in your bed." His expression sobered. "No, It doesn't, but I can protect you from it better if you're by my side rather than at arm's length. His arms tightened around me. I won't let anyone hurt you, Emma, ever. I believed him, strangely enough. Whatever else Alessio might be, I knew his protection was absolute for those he considered his. And I was undeniably his now. What about Dad? I asked. He can't know about this. I gestured between us, encompassing not just our physical relationship, but the entire dangerous world Alessio inhabited. Your father's treatment will continue regardless, he assured me. As for the rest, we'll figure it out together. He pressed a kiss to my forehead, one day at a time. It wasn't a perfect solution. There would be challenges ahead, navigating Alessio's dangerous world, keeping secrets from my father, figuring out who I was now that I had crossed this line. But lying in his arms as the sun rose over the bay, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time: peace. 6 months later, I stood on the same terrace where Alessio and I had shared our first dinner, watching as Dad laughed with Marco by the grill. The sound of his laughter, strong, uninhibited, healthy, still made my heart swell with joy. Dr. Reeves had pronounced him in complete remission 2 weeks ago, though he would continue maintenance treatments for another year as a precaution. He still didn't know the full truth about Alessio, only that he was a successful businessman who had become an important part of my life. The less savory aspects of Alessio's empire remained hidden, a necessary deception I had come to accept as the price of our happiness. Arms encircled me from behind, and I leaned back into Alessio's familiar embrace. "Happy?" he murmured against my ear. I turned in his arms to face him, taking in the face that had become my home, the amber eyes that could still make my heart race, the strong jaw now relaxed in contentment, the mouth that knew exactly how to drive me wild. "Yes," I answered truthfully. "Despite everything, yes." His fingers brushed a strand of hair from my face, the gesture now achingly familiar. "No regrets?" I thought about the journey that had brought us here, from that first meeting at the cafe to the night of the gala that had forced me to confront the reality of his world. There had been difficult moments since then, times when the violence of his life had intruded on our happiness, when I'd questioned my choices, but through it all, his love had remained a constant, fierce and protective and true. "No regrets," I said, rising on tiptoes to brush my lips against his. "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." He smiled against my mouth, the expression transforming his face into the private version only I got to see, the man behind the power, the vulnerability beneath the strength. "Mine," he whispered. The word no longer a threat, but a promise. "Yours," I agreed, sealing the vow with a kiss as the sun set over the bay, painting the sky in shades of amber that matched the eyes of the dangerous, complicated, beloved man who had claimed my heart. In the distance, Dad called for us to join him, his voice strong and vibrant, free from the weakness that had plagued him for so long. Alessio took my hand, interlacing our fingers as we walked toward the future we had chosen. Together, some might call it a devil's bargain, this life I'd embraced. Perhaps it was, but as I looked at Alessio, at the love shining in his eyes when he gazed at me, I knew I wouldn't have it any other way. In the end, we all make compromises for love. Mine had simply been more dramatic than most. I was Alessio Moretti's woman now, his heart, his peace, his home. And he was mine, in every way that mattered. For better or worse, in darkness and in light, we belonged to each other. And that, I had come to learn, was all that truly mattered in this dangerous, beautiful life we had built together.